they're deeply frustrated, deeply disgusted that when they come to work with their skill, education, and experience, that a man can come and earn more.
Linda Clendenning believes the state of Maryland undervalues its women employees. In this half hour, we examine her struggle to change that. We look at the changing roles of women on the job and in society, and we explore the legal and political consequences of the drive for pay equity for women. The elected officials who make the laws for Maryland in this historic state house at Annapolis face a tough task. Can they modernize the pay system for 86,000 employees and at the same time eliminate the disparity in pay between men and women? Linda Clendenning thinks they can. As a local union president, she is leading a campaign to force the state to do something about women isolated in lower-paying jobs. Linda thinks they should be paid more, not at the expense of others, but because what they do is worth more. How Maryland, other states, and the federal government resolve the issue of comparable worth or pay equity is going to have a major effect on the 45 million women who are full-time members of our workforce. When most people think about what they are worth, they ask, what is my value to a specific employer? How much will my talents bring in the marketplace? Is that a subjective judgment, or can it be measured objectively? Some people argue that it is possible to measure the skill, effort, responsibility, and working conditions for each job. Can we then compare all jobs and set equitable pay scales accordingly? And if that is done, will it put an end to the statistical pattern which shows that occupations dominated by women traditionally have been paid less? Our program will try to answer those questions. The story begins with Linda Clendenning, the woman who is demanding answers from her employer, the state of Maryland.
Okay, this is an address. People come up to me and they're harried. Their paper is due in a couple of days and they're so worried. And they also apologize. They don't know anything about the library. This is a huge maze for them to get through.
Linda Clendenning leads students through the 5,000 scholarly journals, magazines, and newspapers at the University of Maryland.
To make sure to put this on the left side.
Linda says the job is to make research fun for students. The university says the job is Library Technical Assistant Class 3. Her 10 years here have not always been smooth.
Well, I got fired, I guess you would say, out of a personality conflict. And then 118 people signed a petition that asked that I be reinstated. And I realized for the first time that it didn't matter how hard I worked or what kind of job I did, I was always in a position of being vulnerable. Once I understood that, I just joined the union, and it's just gone on from there. The new proposal did not discriminate against women.
In 1976, Linda was elected president of the local, representing all types of campus workers. When the university left clerical workers out of the last salary upgrade, she began pushing for better wages.
There is women's work and there is men's work. And this means that what happens then is that women always end up getting paid much less because they're only allowed to do women's work and do not have access into the higher paid male jobs.
A Maryland Commission on Personnel has proposed a new classification system. It would keep clerical jobs, 90% occupied by women, separate from other categories, with no way to recognize comparable worth.
We'll be going to Baltimore to testify before the Sondheim Commission, and we are very concerned about what they're doing.
Imagine going to the supermarket and paying only 66% of the amount rung on the cash register. I'm sorry, you'll say, but since I'm a woman, I only make 66% of a man's salary, so I'm sure you'll understand if I don't pay the whole bill.
Maryland's governor set up the commission under Walter Sondheim and the state personnel secretary Theodore Thornton to examine the pay system for the state's 86,000 employees. When the commission declined to deal with comparable worth, women's groups across the state rose up in protest.
We are convinced that such an occupationally segregated pay plan can only hurt the economic position of women, minorities, and men in female-dominated job titles.
Whatever action the Sondheim Commission takes will have a major impact on the state's largest employer, the University of Maryland. It takes more than 30,000 people to run its 5 campuses, everyone from cooks and food servers to librarians, admission clerks, and the secretaries who schedule classes.
Women don't have that many places to go. There are only certain jobs that are accessible to them, and it has benefited management, the university, and the state because they know that women are out there. The other thing is that the society has changed in the last 10 years radically, and there is much more responsibility on the clerical level, particularly here at the university level.
A university plan for longer hours without an equal increase in pay has upset many employees. To channel this anger into support for comparable worth, Linda and co-workers meet at lunch to plan a new tactic, a hearing on campus before legislators and union officials. Linda will serve as chairperson.
Now, through these hearings, we hope, and we are going to do our best to put tremendous pressure on the university to respond to us. We want them to change our classifications. We want to get a pay equity study. We want to change our conditions here at the university.
People that work in the physical plant, dining hall, campus bookstore, student union, these people are really taken advantage of. Let's hear from them.
The one other person I was thinking of was the woman that's doing the study for the union. Is she's going to come to testify?
Well, I have her down. Pat Moreland is the the highest secretary, your senior secretary. Now, I wonder, she's very experienced and involved in the administration of that department, and also
Can't move.
all of you
Hasn't had a raise since 1973, she'll tell you at every possible opportunity.
and the same thing is that all of you below her can't
stuck
move
because
either.
of her,
So you have
that's
a
right.
whole department that is really just
Dead-ended.
Talk about dead end, concrete. I'm from AFSCME, and we're going to have hearings on pay equity for women workers on campus.
So please try to post that up in your office and try to come, at least for as long as you can, and anybody else that you talk to.
Okay.
Okay?
We're going to have open hearings from 11:30 to 2:30.
Oh, sure, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, you going to come?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, see you there.
Okay.
If funds get pinched and positions are cut, we divide up the responsibilities and continue along, most of the time with no complaints.
I myself am a longtime university employee. I have been here for 16 years. I have been at the top of a grade since 1973. That's 10 years without a raise.
With the exception of personal pride, what is the incentive? It is evident the personnel's attitude is, if you don't like it here, leave. There are at least 3 people waiting to take your job.
They have developed, they have learned new skills, they have grown as individuals, they're worth more, they know they're worth more. We've been at it in a very organized fashion for over a year, and we don't see any action, and people are getting very anxious for some changes.
Hello. Hello. How you doing? All right.
Thank you for taking time.
Linda has brought a union analysis of Maryland state employees to the top personnel officer, Theodore Thornton, also a member of the Sondheim Commission. The report found that women who work for Maryland make 20% less money per year than men do, but Linda came to deliver more than statistics.
What message can you give the women who have been expressing their concerns on the issue of their pay at this point?
We're not trying to hide from the problem, but we are being cautious in terms of what remedies we think are appropriate as solutions to the problem. We have to keep in mind that salary increases statewide, 1%, cost us in excess of $12 million. We've got, on the other hand, the taxpayers who are saying cost of government is too high, the size of the workforce is too large. So we've got to balance some conflicting interests.
Is the state reluctant to really move forward on the issue of comparable worth because other states haven't?
I think the thing that the state is looking at is what is the nature of the problem, who is impacted upon by the problem, and then what are the appropriate remedies. What you decide today is not going to be something that's done for the next 6 months, but it's going to be done with regard to setting salaries for the next 60 years.
The idea of work stoppages, which would have never been considered years ago by women, is on people's minds. You know, they're looking for things that they can do to allow the government to realize that they're deeply frustrated, deeply disgusted, that when they come to work with their skill, education, and experience, that a man can come and earn more than they can. What are we going to tell them?
There is no clear direction in which to go at this point. I would hope that the ladies in the workforce would recognize that we are looking at the issue and that we hope to come to a solution to it. I would imagine that that solution is not far off. That is, I would imagine in the next year to 18 months, depending upon how quickly we can initiate and complete the next study.
It seems that women are very concerned at this point and sort of fed up. And I hope that the state will recognize this and move as expeditiously and efficiently as possible to remedy what we perceive and are very certain is job discrimination.
Linda Clendenning has taken her struggle into a new arena. Her AFSCME local has filed a complaint with the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, charging the University of Maryland with maintaining a sex-segregated workforce. The complaint, which is the first step before going to court, is based on the study which found that the median salary for men is 20% higher than the median salary for women at the university. There have been some new developments on the national scene involving pay equity, specifically for federal employees. Congresswoman Mary Rose Okar chairs the Compensation and Employee Benefits Subcommittee of the House Post Office and Civil Service Committee. What, Mary Rose, is Congress doing about pay equity?
Well, on the House of Representatives side, they passed a bill that I introduced that calls for a study, the first study since 1923, on how we treat our federal employees. We know that women in general make about $11,000 less a year than men do. And our study does not ask that we lower anyone's salary. We just ask that there be not any sex-based wage discrimination.
Mary Rose, at this point, do we really need another study? I mean, don't we know what pay equity entails at this point?
Well, the laws are on the book, but they're not being implemented. And because it's so important to have the proof on our side that there may be discrimination toward women in this case, we need to do the proper studies. As I mentioned, we haven't looked at civil service in the federal government since 1923.
What about the state and local level? Is there any more initiative there?
Well, there are initiatives going on. 25 states and city governments have studies or have implemented a study in an area of trying to achieve pay equity. The state of Minnesota is a very good example of voluntarily having a study, realizing there were some problems, and doing what is just toward the women that were being discriminated against. And by the way, it only increased their payroll about 4%. The state of Washington did not implement their study, and as a result they were sued by AFSCME, and AFSCME won the case. And now they're going to have the burden of all those lawsuits and all the money it costs the state to implement a study that they should have done in the first place.
Thank you, Mary Rose.
Well, thank you.
Currently, many unions have adopted the demand for comparable worth studies in their collective bargaining with cities and states. To understand why women like Linda Clendenning want better mechanisms for setting wages, it is important to look at how women's roles have changed on the job and in society. Until recently, the movement of women into the workplace was often a response to specific needs of business and industry, when the telephone and the typewriter created a surge in office work, when mass production techniques were introduced, when men were pulled off production lines to fight this country's wars. The numbers of working women grew, but they were not perceived as anything but temporary workers. Wages were often set at half of the pay of men, and promotion was not considered necessary. But over the past 20 years, there have been changes that demand a new understanding of women in the workforce. Since 1960, the number of women working full-time in the U.S. has doubled. More than 1/2 of all adult women now work, and they make up 43% of the entire labor force. In the 1980s, these numbers will continue to grow. Every 7 out of 10 new jobs created will be filled by women. Today, women are better educated. For the first time, the average amount of education, 12.5 years, is the same for working men and working women. Another economic fact for women is that most of them work as a matter of survival. 1/3 of all working women are divorced, separated, or married to men who earn less than $15,000 a year. 1 out of every 6 families is headed by a woman, a number that has doubled in the last 2 decades. While the number of better educated, full-time working women is steadily increasing, the kinds of jobs they do and how they are valued has remained the same. In job categories including nurses, secretaries, phone operators, and bank tellers, where the work is increasingly skilled but traditionally low-paying, 90% of the employees are women. But in better-paying technical and managerial occupations, only 2 out of 10 jobs go to women. And despite the gains in education, a woman with a college degree has only the same earning power as a man with an 8th grade education. Among high school graduates, a woman earns $7,000 less than a man, and with a college degree, the gap widens to $12,000. Despite increases in education, experience, and family responsibilities, the bottom line for a woman worker is this: for every dollar a man earns, she can expect to make only 62 cents. With us to examine the difference that exists in the pay for men and women is Wynn Newman, an attorney who recently represented AFSCME in a successful wage discrimination case against the state of Washington, and Linda Chavez, the staff director of the United States Civil Rights Commission. Ms. Chavez opposes the use of comparable worth concept in wage setting. Does the wage gap, 62 cents for women compared to $1 for men, Mr. Newman, constitute discrimination?
A substantial part of it results from discrimination. Another part of it results from various other things like training and women leaving the workforce, but clearly a substantial part of it results from discrimination.
What's your reaction to that, Ms. Chavez?
Well, first of all, the 62-cent figure is one that I would challenge. If you use hourly wages as opposed to weekly or annual wages, the gap is really 72 cents with a 28-cent gap. But beyond that, I think we do know that there is discrimination in the workplace, and it in fact may contribute to a wage gap between men and women, but we don't know how much. And I don't think any economist can pinpoint and say this is exactly how much of the wage gap is accountable by discrimination.
I would think the issue is not really how much discrimination there is, but what are we going to do about the discrimination that does exist?
Well, that's what we want to find out today. Nina Totenberg, the legal reporter for National Public Radio, has been following this issue in the courts. And Nina, do the judges look on the wage gap as discrimination?
They really haven't said yet. The Supreme Court a few years ago said that comparable worth is a valid concept, but they didn't say how far the courts could go in enforcing that concept. And in fact, the women who brought that case and won the conceptual battle lost their battle to get comparable worth pay in the long run. Recently, a case in Washington brought by Mr. Newman on behalf of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees was successful at the district court level. The state was found to have discriminated against women on a wholesale basis. That case will now be appealed to the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit has already recently ruled on one comparable worth case that is not really the same as the one decided in Washington State, but has some similar elements, and the comparable worth side lost. So I think we're looking at a long legal battle here, one that may seesaw for some years and will eventually, almost without a doubt, end up in the Supreme Court.
Well, just so we all understand it clearly, there is no argument about discrimination, wage discrimination. It does exist, and it is illegal. Okay. Where there is an awful lot of controversy is how do we resolve this whole matter of wage discrimination? Spell out what it is that you feel we should do to resolve the issue of wage discrimination.
I think the dispute is a little more basic than that. I think the real dispute is about what constitutes discrimination. How do you go about proving discrimination? I think Mr. Newman, in his case in Washington State, used statistics that show that on the average in the state of Washington, female workers in the state were paid an average of 20% less than male workers, and that was shown as a proof of discrimination. I would contend that you need to look beyond those statistics to find out why it is people in those jobs are being paid less, and if in fact there are reasonable explanations that can explain those differences, that you may not have a case of discrimination there. And that, I think, is the real issue.
I want to ask Ms. Chavez a question. It seems to me that we get bogged down in an oversimplistic debate here between is this free market, fair market discrimination, or is it bad, old-fashioned discrimination? In Washington State, there are probably dozens of job categories that are, at least to the common sense view, look to be discrimination. For example, if a retail store clerk, predominantly female, makes 20% less than a liquor store clerk, is that not clearly discrimination, just on the factual basis of it? If toll takers make more than low-level nurses, does not that appear to be discrimination? If supervisory nurses make less than groundskeepers at a given hospital, isn't that obviously discrimination?
Not necessarily, because women who go into the field of nursing, women who go into the field of teaching, often go into those fields precisely so that they can manage families and so that they can move in and out of the job market. Even today, the need to be able to leave a job at a certain hour in order to get home to your dependent children, the need to be able to be near a telephone in case of an emergency, those are things that, not in job evaluation schemes, but in the real world of work for women, those are things that matter.
Are women being penalized then, since they
It's
are,
not a question of being penalized.
they're
making
raising
choices
children alone
in
without
part,
husbands.
But they are making choices in part in order to have other aspects to their job that
this
are
has nothing
important
to do
to
with
them.
this
And the
issue.
importance of the family,
Nothing
it
to do with
does
the
have
issue.
something to do
Because
with
this
it.
issue has to do with what people are being paid for the work they are performing. And Ms. Chavez neglected to point out that there was a whole panoply of evidence in Washington State dealing with discrimination, to show the state deliberately discriminated.
Mr.
That it
Newman,
deliberately segregated its employees, that it hired its toll collectors because they were men. It didn't just happen because you're comparing toll collectors with nurses. What was put in evidence is that the toll collectors were hired because they were men, the nurses were hired as women, that they advertised for the toll collectors in the man's column of newspapers and the classified ads, and they deliberately caused segregation and deliberately engaged in other kinds of discriminatory conduct. Now, it may be those ads are now illegal. That's perfectly true, although we still find Gal Friday ads, as I just did recently. But once you establish a pattern that this is a man's job, this is a woman's job, that perpetuates unless an employer does something to eradicate it.
Chavez.
How do you account for such things as the women going into non-traditional fields? And you've had an enormous increase in the number of women going into the law, going into engineering, going into medicine, and various professions, all high-paying jobs.
There are women moving into certain fields, but also the number of women librarians has increased in the last 10 years from 83% women to 87%.
Why is that increased?
Well, obviously, segregation is not decreasing. Retail clerks, females have increased from 81% to 83% in the last 10 years. Elementary school teachers.
We think that the nurses as a body are tremendously discriminated against when they're highly skilled and they've been traditionally low paid.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very difficult to organize. And I think one of the ways that they're going to increase their salaries is through that organizing.
Well,
and
I mean, should it be up to them, though? You're saying
that is
that they have
traditionally,
to.
that's what the labor movement's all
should
about.
they have to do this? I mean, shouldn't
workers
society
have always done
recognize
this in our
the fact that
society.
they are low
This
paid?
is what unions are about.
If unions truly believed what Linda Chavez is saying, they would oppose the minimum wage law because, after all, the union should get it through collective bargaining.
No, that's
in fact,
not
the
true.
unions have supported the minimum wage law. Unions used to bargain about safety laws and still do, but they don't give up the right to use the legal forum when they can't get something at the bargaining table.
How do you feel about the future, especially as it pertains to women-dominated jobs?
In terms of women-dominated jobs, I think that unions may be successful in organizing in nursing. They may be successful in organizing in the secretarial ranks, and I think you will see some change in salaries there. But I think that there will continue to be some women who wish to take jobs that allow them to have their share of family responsibilities, and that's not something that's going to be eliminated.
Are you saying that they should accept low-paying jobs or cope with them or be content with them?
I think that women will continue to do that. I think that you'll see more men going into those fields as well who also want to take on family responsibility, and I think that's one of the healthy things that's come about through the women's movement.
Mr. Newman?
Well, I think Ms. Chavez is wrong on her statistics. In the last 20 years since the passage of the Civil Rights Act, there has been basically no real change in the segregation level. I think in terms of the future, that if the women's movement, if the union movement, and if women begin to utilize this law that we have on the books, we are on the threshold with this doctrine of proving that the reason for the difference is based upon wage discrimination, and we're on the threshold of eliminating the pervasive sex-based wage discrimination and race-based, so the issue is the same, race-based wage discrimination in this country.
I think that there is massive sex discrimination that exists, and some of it, much of it, is not really explainable for some of the reasons suggested by Ms. Chavez. And I don't think collective bargaining will solve it. On the other hand, I think Ms. Chavez is right. Women are different than men. They bear children. They have probably more responsibility for those children in this society. But lastly, increasingly in this society, women have to work. I don't remember whether it's 2/5 or something like that of the women in this country now are head of household or else have husbands who make less than $15,000 a year, or they're widowed or divorced, and they've got to work. And they're in no different circumstance than a man traditionally has been. And they are going to be the force out there, I think, that's pushing everybody, like it or not, to change their way of doing things.
Do you feel they will get the pay, though?
I think there are still a lot of sexual stereotypes in this country and every other in the world. And in our lifetimes, we're not going to see it equal, but we're going to see it better.
I'm sorry, but we run out of time. Thank you very much. Now that we've heard what the legal and political issues of pay equity are about, let's return to someone who is a member of a female-dominated category, Linda Clendening. I asked her why this struggle for pay equity is so important.
What will happen is that more and more children who are in households headed by females, who cannot earn living wages, are going to be thrown into poverty. If we are raising a generation of children in poverty, the whole society is going to suffer. And this is what we don't want to happen, and this is what we want to change. It's historical. We think we can change it. We have to change it. We have no choice.
Comparable worth is a new phrase for most of us, but if, as Linda Clendening says, it is a genuine civil rights issue that affects our whole society, then we know from experience that it won't go away. If the pay equity struggle is not resolved in our legislatures and courts, women will have to turn to more traditional ways of influencing wages in the marketplace: organizing, collective bargaining, and pressure. It is perhaps too early to tell which route the comparable worth issue will take. We may learn more as the state of Washington case involving public employees moves through the appeal process. But we will be hearing more about comparable worth or pay equity because of the numbers. There are 50 million women in America working full-time. 1 out of 6 families is headed by a woman, but a woman can still expect to earn only 62 cents for every dollar a man gets. That's all for this edition of America Works. I'm Marie Torre.